Have you ever wondered why the pyramids of Giza were built? You would think something as enormous as a pyramid must surely have a worthy purpose behind it, right? Yet it is said that the pyramids were built to be graves for pharaohs. Really? That giant pyramid is just a tombstone? Well, here is my conspiracy theory. They were probably a failed attempt to build spaceships to fight off aliens. Yeah. The Egyptians didn't know how to build it, and when it failed, they covered it up with the grave story. I mean, those are ancient people we're talking about, and they didn't know much anyway. After all, according to one biblical story, one of their pharaohs charged his army right into the Red Sea, hoping to walk through the waters and so drowned himself and his entire army. That was stupid. Grave or not, pyramids were just too big and too expensive for any practical use for humans. So why did they build them? Only if those ancient Egyptians knew what we know today. Because we wouldn't do something that silly, right? Wrong. Turns out we are no better than the ancient Egyptians. From bridges that are only allowed for a couple of hundred cars per day to, something I like to call the most expensive money sink. We too have countless insanely costly projects that end up being utterly useless. And now we look at the most ridiculous of these expensive yet useless megaprojects of our time. Our theater is the whole world, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's get right to it. Interstate H3, Hawaii. Did I say interstate in Hawaii? Yep. And surprise, it is just 15 miles long, and it doesn't connect any two states. The name has actually to do with the fact that it was funded by the federal government, and there is nothing interstate about it. Although it is just 15 miles long, it costs about $1.3 billion to build, and the super expensive highway is barely used at all. What is going on there? See, unlike many other interstates, H3 was mainly built with defense purposes in mind. It was meant to connect the Marine Corps base in eastern Hawaii to the naval base of Pearl Harbor in Honolulu. When the project was announced, the natives resisted fiercely on the grounds that it invaded the environment, but more importantly, it passed over an ancient burial ground where dead spirits lurked. Despite numerous protests from the locals, the construction began, and after more than a decade, it was completed in 1997. Due to rough terrain that required punching tunnels through rocky mountains, the price tag was sky high. The highway, however, is one shiny, giant concrete starved of cars moving on it. This is because the locals avoid the interstate like plague. Quite literally, because they believe that the ancestral spirits, angered by the violation of their sanctuary, patrol the highway, striking down anyone foolish enough to venture. So the interstate is mostly vacant, with occasional military trucks and few cars ever using it. That's one expensive yet useless interstate. Monju Nuclear Power Plant, Japan. This is a sad story of disasters and errors. Japan, you see, is a very small island country with scarce natural resources, despite having an enormous economy. So to generate electricity for their industry, they made the logical decision to build a string of nuclear power plants, the total reaching 17 major NPPs. They soon ran into a problem, however. All these nuclear power plants produced toxic nuclear waste, which was hard to dispose of, and the waste just kept piling up. Confronted with this, they decided to gamble on a novel idea. Enter Monju NPP. This is not just another nuclear power plant. Monju was meant to use nuclear waste from the other NPPs as fuel to generate electricity. So, off they went, spent a gigantic $12 billion to construct the NPP based on an experimental idea. When done, the engineers got together, flipped the switch, and nothing. No electricity. Oh, that's just messed up. But they weren't about to go back now, so they decided to operate it anyway. A few years later, a technical fault caused a large fire in the power plant, and the plant was shut down. They restarted the reactor back up again in 2010, and it generated nothing again. A few months later, another misfortune struck that plagued the power plant. One of the refueling rods fell to the reactor floor and got busted. 5 years later, the plant was shut down and marked for demolition. But wait, there's more. Just to dismantle the NPP, it will cost Japan another $3.4 billion, and it will take more than 3 decades. Costly when alive, costly when dead. Producing electricity just for an hour. The Banju nuclear power plant is one monumental failure of megaprojects. What do you think about Banju? Leave your comments down below. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Okay, let's get back to it. Ciudad Real International Airport, Spain. You know, in heavily overloaded airports, it is quite common to build alternative airports outside of cities they are already located in. But planners of this particular airport in Spain went too little too far. Instead of building the airport 10 to 20 miles out, they decided to build it 200 kilometers away from Madrid, the city whose airport it was supposed to augment. When the airport opened for operations in 2009, airlines were understandably not so enthusiastic to use it. Very few airlines started flights to the airport, but quickly halted later on. The poor location of the airport, coupled with the financial troubles of the holding company, led to the shutdown of the airport in 2012. The company soon declared bankruptcy. When the airport was put up for auction, a Chinese company offered a humiliating 10,000 euros, which was rejected. Following the suspension of passenger flights during COVID pandemic, the airport served as temporary storage of planes. By 2021, however, the airport was forced to close its doors again after the new owner defaulted on debt payments. To this day, the Ciudad Real International Airport remains devoid of planes with no prospects of passenger flights returning anytime soon. For $1.3 billion, this is the most useless and expensive airport in the world. Building $1 billion airport in the middle of nowhere was probably a bad idea. Who knew? Border wall, US-Mexico border, US. This is a funny one. Donald J. Trump, the former president of the United States, had a grand plan to finally solve the age-old refugee problem on the US-Mexico border. It was simple. Build a 1,000-mile long, sturdy concrete wall on the border. Ha! How come nobody else thought of that before? Oh, and Mexico was gonna pay for it. As you might imagine though, Mexico wasn't interested in paying a dime. So out of the 1,000 miles promised, only about half the length had been built, and it isn't concrete. It is a steel reinforced fence-ish kind of thing. All the refugees had to do was climb over it or cut their way through. In some places, the fence was simply toppled over by a gentle breeze. Ouch. Built with the breathtaking $15 billion and costing billions more per year in maintenance, this wall has earned a place on this useless megaprojects list. Naypyidaw City, Myanmar. Notice I didn't name anything specific in Naypyidaw. I said Naypyidaw City itself. That's right. This capital city of Myanmar, which cost a whopping $4 billion to build, is one of the most expensive failures in megaprojects. The city was entirely built from the ground up as a replacement for the former capital, Yangon. Fearing a naval attack on the shore city of Yangon, the military leaders of the government secretly initiated the construction of the new capital in 2002, about 200 miles from the old capital. In 2012, the construction works were finalized and the city officially assumed its function as capital. But the city remains largely a ghost town. Despite being 8 times the size of New York, the city has only a tiny fraction of its population. Naypyidaw sports a presidential palace and several expensive buildings, but it features very few residents. so the bored and shiny freeways are almost always empty, with little to no businesses and little of everything valued for a city. Predictably, people preferred the business and buzz of the old capital to the new shiny ghost town. Hong Kong Zhuhai Macau Bridge, or HZMB, China. Well, this one is the most puzzling of all. This is a 55-kilometer bridge and tunnel system stretched over the open sea connecting Hong Kong, Zhuhai, and Macau in China. To give you an idea, this bridge is 110 times the length of the famous Brooklyn Bridge. With a price tag of a staggering $19 billion, it is both the longest sea crossing and the longest open sea fixed link in the world. The HZMB reduced travel time from Zhuhai to Hong Kong from 4 hours to a mere 30 minutes. Everything about the HZMB looks great, except for the fact that very few vehicles actually use it. Why? The trouble mostly lies with the administrative system of China. You see, Hong Kong and Macau are autonomous special administrative cities. What this means is that when you drive over HZMB, you are crossing borders. Well, kind of. So you will need papers for this respective administrations. In fact, a permit. What is more is the vehicle crossing the bridge must be registered and have insurance covered in all 3 cities. Even with that, you need to be someone important like a politician or an academic to have your application processed. Oh, and they only allow about 300 applications a day. Why did they even build the blasted thing in the first place? Forest City, Malaysia. Fittingly named the Forest City, this metropolis is the perfect blend of a city and a forest. The city was designed to be a green city, built for the ground up on 4 artificial islands. First announced in 2006, the city formally opened its doors to residents in 2016, but only a few ever came. The developers originally targeted the rich Chinese middle class, promising an alternative to high-cost apartments in their own country. But it didn't go as planned. Soon the leadership of mainland China changed, and with it came a new law that prohibited citizens from spending over $50,000 a year outside of China. Thus, the Green City became something of a golden apple in the sky. Too far for the Chinese, but too expensive for the local Malaysians. So far, only about 15,000 flats have been sold after 8 years, and fewer than 500 people call the city their home. The Forest City, however, costs an incredible $100 billion. For that kind of money, that could have built 2 more Three Georges dams and still have $20 billion to spare. All we can say is RIP. Alright, now we come to my favorite and our final stop. Bataan Nuclear Power Plant in the Philippines. I call this one the money black hole, and it is a classic example of a project gone horribly wrong. Bataan NPP was the Philippines' first attempt at a nuclear power. The plant was announced in 1973, and things immediately went south. The local people opposed to the construction, and the government had to build it under martial law. Westinghouse Electric, the company awarded with the construction contract, bribed the officials of the country to reduce construction costs and win out on the bid. So the company used low-quality materials to save on cost. That's not all. The plant was located next to an active volcano, on top of a geological fault line, and very close to shore, exposing it to potential tsunamis. Throw in the destructive power of nuclear accidents to the mix, and what you have at your hands is a perfect recipe for disaster. Although the construction was plagued by a myriad of problems, it was completed in 1984. But the plant was never activated, the major issue being concern over safety. When assessments were conducted, over 4,000 problems were identified. Although fully capable of operation, the plant just sat there, shortly after the Chernobyl nuclear catastrophe came as a stark warning about operating unsafe nuclear plants. Ironically, the plant was never shut down, but it was never activated either. The initial cost of construction was about $2.3 billion. Meanwhile, the Philippines has spent tens of millions of dollars each year on maintenance alone for decades, since with absolutely nothing to show for it. Indeed, Bataan is a big money sink. There you have it, our list of useless megaprojects. Which one do you think is the most useless? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like and share the video, and subscribe to the channel while you're at it, and you won't miss any future videos. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you next time.